Good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. We're very saddened and distressed to hear as we came out of Shabbos about a rocket attack in Israel that killed 12 people, including children who were playing soccer. These were Hezbollah rockets that hit a Druze Arab village in the north. And there are many people injured who are healing. So I'd like to dedicate our learning for the healing of everyone who's injured in that attack and for the comfort, whatever comfort could be had for the mourners, for the grieving mourners, the parents of those children and other family members of people who were killed in that attack. May God comfort the bereaved and strengthen them and speed the healing of everyone who was injured in that attack. I also just want to share very quickly something that I noticed this morning in Shul when we were reading this week's Torah portion, which was Torah portion Pinchas. Very, very colorful portion where Pinchas does what needs to be done in the attack on the Jewish people through the women of Midian, seducing the men of Israel and getting them to commit idolatry through lust. I mean, this idea of people pursuing their basest desires and turning their back on what is good and righteous, it's as old as humankind. But something that often gets overlooked in that Torah portion is that Moses is told for the first time that because of the matter when you were told to talk to the rock and he struck the rock, etc., that you will not enter the promised land. And this Torah portion records Moses' reaction to that. And he doesn't beg, please change your mind, God, let me in. His first reaction to that is, if I can't lead the Jewish people, please, God, appoint a worthy leader. Somebody who will lead them, going out and coming in, somebody whose merit will be great and stand for them. And then Moses concludes his short but really effective and beautiful prayer by saying, let the congregation of Hashem, the congregation of God, not be like sheep without a shepherd, right? Let the congregation of Hashem not be like sheep without a shepherd. Now he's talking about leadership. But every word in the Torah is there for a reason, and every phrase is there for a reason. So if you think about the phrase, let the congregation of God not be like sheep without a shepherd, we find within it, let the congregation of God not be like sheep. Not be like sheep. Now there's a lot of meanings in that, right? That we should not be like sheep. One idea, of course, is we need to be strong. When our enemies are attacking us, we're not going to scurry away with our heads down. This is a time when Jews have to stand proud and be strong and be accountable to our own people to protect ourselves, right? That's why I took my jacket off and I'm just wearing my Magen Am shirt. I've told you many times before, I'm part of an armed security force. I was not somebody who was into guns. I didn't grow up around guns. I don't particularly like guns. But in a time of danger, I and so many other people are just stepping up to protect ourselves and get the training that is necessary, as well as the licensing. And I firmly advocate that anyone, who has a firearm should have extensive training on how to use it safely, and how to use it when needed. It also means that we should not be like sheep, that we should not be led around by, whatever messaging is in the air. Each of us is the master of our own household, our inner household. Right? So you and I control what's going to get inside our house. We don't have to allow every piece of information, every piece of lustful imagery, every kind of junk and fake news. We don't have to let that in. And we have to be people who are smart and who train ourselves to evaluate all our inputs, where we get our news. And these days you have to have multiple sources to get your news so that you can triangulate what's actually true. And it's very important, where we get our information from so that we can make good and wise decisions in our lives. So in just every way, let us heed Moses' prayer for our people, that we not be like sheep without a shepherd, and that we not be like sheep. Okay. So tonight, you might notice in the title of the class, it's a triple daf. We're going to cover 3 pages, and it's still going to be a short class because these dafs in this area of Bava Basra are so short. And we're already starting page 33 on the B side. So it'll still be a short class, and we're going to get 2 more pages ahead. And again, that'll stand us well, both at Tisha B'Av when we can't learn that day, and then later in August, Nina and I are going to deliver our kids to school. So we'll probably miss a few days there as well. Okay. Page 33b, we're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. And this is all about establishing ownership by living on a piece of land or using a piece of property for several years. And lately we've been talking about, well, when you establish that ownership, how are you doing it? Is it the testimony of witnesses? What if somebody else brings witnesses that has a competing claim? What do we do with contradictory testimonies of valid witnesses, etc.? Okay, 33b, right near the top. There was an incident where 2 people dispute the ownership of land. And this one says, the land belonged to my ancestors and I inherited it from them. And that one says, the land belonged to my ancestors and I inherited from them. So this one brings witnesses that the land belonged to his ancestors, and that one brings witnesses that he worked and profited from the land for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. He's been there for the last 3 years, right? So both of them say it belonged to their ancestors and inherited from them. One has witnesses to that effect. The other one has witnesses to the effect that he's been living there for 3 years, which would be enough for him to have presumptive ownership of the land, and he would have to be dislodged from that. So Rav Chisda said, the one who is in possession of the land is deemed credible, due to the legal principle that if one would have been deemed credible, had he stated one claim, but instead he stated another claim that accomplishes the same result, he has credibility, because why would he lie and state this claim? If he wants to lie, he could have said, I purchased it from you, and I worked and profited from the land for the years necessary to establish presumptive ownership. Abaye and Rava do not hold in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chisda, because they hold that we do not say the principle of why would I lie, that this principle does not apply in a case where there are witnesses contradicting the claim that he is stating. And in this case, witnesses testify that it belonged to the ancestors of the other claimant. So he can't use the principle of why would I lie, because, well, if he did lie, then that would have been refuted by the other witnesses. So all we've got is one who says, yeah, it's my land that I inherited from my ancestors, with witnesses. And this one says, I've been living on it. I inherited from my ancestors, and I've been living on it for 3 years, and I have witnesses that I've been living on it for 3 years. So what is the outcome of that? They actually don't say, but we would have to evaluate. Oh, thank you. Let's light up the darkness. If Nina came in, it's because she noticed, but maybe somebody commented. So thank you. Now, so we'd have to resolve then, well, which claim is stronger, but that's not what the point of that story was. The point was that in terms of the principle of why would I lie, if I could have brought a stronger claim and I didn't, and must be telling the truth, here that claim doesn't work because the other testimony would contradict that aspect of it. Now, new incident. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this land of mine? Meaning somebody comes and finds somebody living on his land, he says, and he's saying, what are you doing here? And the possessor, the one in possession of the land, said to him in response, I purchased it from you, and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary to establish the presumption of ownership. And he then went and brought witnesses that he had profited from the land for 2 years, but he was unable to bring witnesses to testify about a third year. So he claims he's been there for 3 years, which would establish his presumption of ownership, but he's only got witnesses to testify that he's been there for 2 years. Rav Nachman said the land reverts back to the prior owner because, right, he has the chazaka, he has the presumption of ownership since everyone admits that he owned it before, and this guy who claims he bought it and has been living there for 2 years, he claims he's been living there for 3 years, but he's only got witnesses to say he's been there for 2 years. What about the claim that he bought it? Well, if he's talking about a presumption of ownership, it's because he doesn't have the deed or witnesses to the deed, right? It might have happened, but he doesn't have those witnesses. That's why he's relying on witnesses to prove his continuing living there for 3 years, but he doesn't have that. He only has witnesses testifying that he's been there for 2 years. So Rav Nachman says the land reverts back to the prior owner. And not only that, but payment for the produce consumed during those 2 years also reverts to the prior owner. Since the one in possession was unable to substantiate his claim to the land, the assumption is that he consumed the produce unlawfully. Rav Zevid said, if initially when questioned by the other, the one occupying the land claimed and said, I entered the land to consume its produce that I had purchased, he is deemed credible. After all, didn't Rabbi Yehuda say, this one who is holding a sickle and rope and says, I will go cull the dates from the date tree of so-and-so who sold it to me. This person is deemed credible that he has the right to do that. Apparently, a person is not so brazen that he would cull the dates of a date tree that is not his. And here too, in the case discussed by Rav Zevid, a person is not so brazen as to consume produce that is not his. And the Gemara asks, if that is so, that the assumption is that he would not lie, let one be deemed credible with regard to the land as well. And the Gemara answers, in terms of the land, we say to him, show your bill of sale if you indeed purchased it. And the Gemara challenges this. But if that is so, then in terms of the produce as well, let him be deemed credible only if he can produce documentation of his claim that he has a right to the produce. And the Gemara explains it is not common for people to write documents to establish the right to consume produce alone, and one can therefore claim to have consumed the produce based on an oral agreement. Whereas people don't buy and sell parcels of land by oral agreements. There they have a deed of sale drawn up. They might lose it, but it exists. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this land of mine? Again, somebody claims that he finds that someone who's the prior owner claims, what are you doing on my land? And the possessor said to him in response, I purchased it from you, and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. And he then brought one witness who testified that he profited from the land for the necessary 3 years. Now, the rabbis who were studying before Abaye maintained that it made sense to say that the principle in this case is the same as in the case of that piece of cast metal, Naska, adjudicated by Rabbi Abba. What was the case of the cast metal adjudicated by Rabbi Abba? There was a certain man who snatched a piece of cast metal from another, and the one from whom it was taken came before Rabbi Ami while Rabbi Abba was sitting before him. And he brought one witness who testified that it was in fact snatched from him. Now the one who snatched it said to him, yes, it is true that I snatched it, but I merely snatched that which was mine. Rabbi Ami said, and now we're on page 34a, how should judges judge for this judgment? There are reasons not to implement all potential rulings. If they were to order the one who snatched the metal to pay for it, that would not be the correct ruling, because there are not two witnesses who saw him snatch it. You can't say that it was established as being stolen because we don't have the testimony of two witnesses. We only have one witness, and we don't establish a matter except in very, very few specific cases generally speaking, we don't establish a matter under Jewish law by the testimony of one witness. So we can't say he has to return it because we have heard evidence that it's been stolen. We only had one witness to that. And the court does not force payment based on the testimony of one witness. So if they were to accept his claim and exempt him entirely, well, that would also not be the correct ruling because there is one witness who testified against him. If they were to order him to take an oath, which is the usual response to counter the testimony of one witness, didn't he say that he did in fact snatch it? And since he said that he snatched it, and there is no proof that it is his, he is like a robber. And the court does not allow a robber to take an oath. He claims, yes, I snatched it because it was mine, but he can't prove that it was originally his, that he was the prior owner. And if indeed we can't establish that, but we know by the testimony of one witness that he snatched it, then we can't force him to take an oath because he might be a robber, and we don't accept oaths from robbers. So Rabbi Abba said to them, here's what we do. He is one who is liable to take an oath because it was a testimony of one witness against him, so he can excuse himself by taking an oath. If there were two witnesses, he would simply have to pay. Since there was only one witness, he becomes liable to take an oath that he in fact is telling the truth, and then he skates. But he is one who is liable to take an oath who is unable to take an oath. And anyone who is liable to take an oath, who is unable to take an oath, is liable to pay. The rabbis who were studying before Abaye thought that the case of the witness to the years of profiting and Rabbi Abba's case are similar in that since the possessor is unable to take an oath to refute the witness, as he concedes that he profited from the land for those years, he should have to pay for his consumption of the produce. Abaye said to these rabbis, how can you compare these two cases? There, in Rabbi Abba's case with the cast metal that was stolen, the witness is coming to undermine the position of the one who snatched the metal. Right? The witness is coming to say he snatched it, not it was his. Right? So he's coming to undermine the position of the snatcher. And this can be seen from the fact that when it would be the case that another witness comes to court and testifies alongside the first witness, and if we then had two witnesses, then he would just be considered a thief. He'd have to prove that it was originally his. He doesn't have that proof, so he would be adjudicated a thief and pay the penalty of a thief. And we would take the piece of metal away from him, take the piece of metal away from the one who snatched it. By contrast, here in the case of the individual who brought one witness to attest to his profiting from the land, the witness is coming to support the one who is in possession of the land. And this can be seen from the fact that if another witness would come to court and testify alongside the first witness, we would say, okay, he has two witnesses that say he purchased the land, he's been living on it for 3 years, it's his land, he's done. If he had two witnesses, he'd be all set. He only has one witness, but the witness is supporting him, not contradicting him. Therefore, the testimony of the one witness does not render the one who profited from the land liable to take an oath, so no oath is involved. So rather, if this case of Rabbi Abba is comparable to a case such as this, it would be comparable to a case where there is one witness and he testifies to someone's profiting from the land for 2 years. And the comparison is in terms of payment for the produce that he consumed. In terms of the consumption of the produce, two witnesses would have rendered the possessor liable to pay, as consumption of produce for only 2 years does not establish the presumption of ownership, and therefore, since he doesn't own that land, he hasn't established presumption of ownership, and we take the land away from him and give it back to its original owner, then what was he doing consuming the produce of that land? He, in effect, was stealing it, and he would have to pay for that as well. Therefore, one witness renders him liable to take an oath. Since he himself claimed that he profited from the land as the witness testified, he cannot take an oath to contest the testimony because he's considered a robber. Therefore, he would have to pay for the produce. Right? So definitely, you've heard it enough times now. In modern times, it doesn't really come up because there's just no such thing as buying and selling on land without a recorded deed, right? Thank God we live in a time and place when all deeds for the purchase and sale of land get recorded by a registrar. So this doesn't come up too much, except that aren't there now cases of a kind of identity theft where people end up somehow undermining a deed? They borrow against a piece of land without the owner even knowing about it, and then the bank comes in and seizes the land, and people lose their property. So, obviously, keep your records safe and clean, and check up on any possible identity theft. I mean, these days it's getting worse and worse and worse, right? I'm getting letters all the time now that my information was, released in some kind of data breach, and I can join Experian or whatever, identity monitoring services there are. Sometimes I wonder if that's a scam. I don't know. It's totally outside the scope of our class, but definitely take your record keeping seriously. Okay, now we're on page 34b. The Gemara relates there was a certain boat that two people were quarreling about with regard to its ownership. And this one said, the boat is mine. And that one also said, the boat is mine. One of them came to court and said, seize it, asking the judges of the court, seize the boat until I am able to bring witnesses that the boat is mine. And the Gemara asks, in such a case, do we, the judges of the court, do we seize the boat or do we not seize it? And Rav Huna said, we seize it. And Rav Yehuda said, we do not seize it, as there is no cause for the court to intervene. He hasn't brought witnesses yet. He claims that please seize the boat from me so that it doesn't get lost or ruined or damaged, and I will bring witnesses shortly. But he hasn't brought witnesses yet. So how can the court take action like that? But in fact, the court seized the boat. The one who requested of the court to seize it went to seek witnesses, but he did not find witnesses. Now you see the wisdom of Rav Yehuda that the court should not intervene. This guy says he has witnesses, but he never brought them. Meanwhile, the court seized the boat based on what? Testimony that was not backed up by witnesses. So he said to the court, release the boat. Wait, who is he? The court seized the boat. The one who requested of the court to seize it went to seek witnesses, but did not find witnesses. He, okay, so the guy who claimed to be the owner but couldn't find witnesses, he then said to the court, release the boat, and whoever is stronger prevails. As this is the ruling in a case where there is neither evidence nor presumptive ownership for either litigant, right? So we've been talking about where people have witnesses, they have a presumption of ownership because they've been there for 3 years, or they have witnesses that they inherited, or they have witnesses that they purchased. Okay, well, what if there's a piece of property, in this case a boat, and no one can prove ownership? No one has witnesses, no one has a deed of sale, no one has evidence of any kind. Then what? What do we do with it? Sounds like finders keepers, right? Well, what if two people are making the claim that they found it at the same time, but neither one has evidence? What's going to happen? More or less, the stronger one prevails. Now, what does stronger mean? Is it literally somebody with big muscles who can beat up the other guy? Maybe. Or maybe it's somebody who has bigger lawyers, or somebody who has more pull around the town. I mean, this is just a very real world example. If no one has a claim that can be substantiated with evidence, what's going to end up happening? The one who's in a better position to take hold of that property is going to end up holding it. And the Gemara asks, in such a case, do we release it? Now, that's what the guy was saying, that the law is. He's telling the court, well, the law is that in such a case where there's no evidence, the stronger one prevails. So your job as the court is to release the boat. And the court is wondering, is that the law? Right? In such a case, do we release the boat or do we not release it? And Rav Yehuda, who said we don't seize the boat because there's no evidence that substantiates that, but now that we have seized it, what do? Rav Yehuda said we do not release it. Right, so the same Rav Yehuda who said the court should not be seizing a boat in the absence of evidence is saying that, but if the court erroneously does seize the boat, then they don't release it. Why? Rav Papa said, we release it. And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that we do not seize property in a case where ownership is uncertain, and where it was seized, we do not release it. We do not release it. Here's the note. Once property that may belong to a particular person is in the jurisdiction of the court, they have no right to relinquish it without being certain that the one acquiring it is the rightful owner. The court is in the business of adjudicating just and rightful outcomes. A boat belongs to somebody. Somebody had that boat built. Maybe that guy died and it belongs to his heirs, and they have to do an investigation and find out who originally owned the boat and what became of him and does he have heirs, etc. And then maybe at the end of the day, if they can't find that, maybe there's going to be some kind of an auction or some kind of a righteously administrated releasing of the boat, but not just let the stronger one take it. So the stronger one prevails is not really a legal principle. It's just a description of what happens in the real world, but it's not how a court runs its business. Now, there was an incident where two people dispute the ownership of property. And this one says it belongs to my ancestors and I inherited it from them. And that one says it belonged to my ancestors and I inherited it from them. And there was neither evidence nor presumptive ownership for either litigant, right? So same idea as the boat, but in this case, it's real property. Rav Nachman said, whoever is stronger prevails. And the Gemara asks, and in what way is this different from the case where two people produced two deeds of sale or gift for the same field that were issued on one day? Now we're on page 35a. As Rav said, in that case, they should divide the property between them. So in the absence of any other evidence and two people making a claim, why not divide it? And Shmuel said it is decided based on the discretion of the judges. Why, in the seemingly equivalent case of a dispute where there is no evidence for either litigant, did Rav Nachman rule that whoever is stronger prevails? And the Gemara answers, there in the case of two deeds, it will not be possible for the court to clarify the matter in the future, and therefore the court issues a ruling according to the information they currently have. They have two deeds before them, so they split it. Here, in the case of Rav Nachman, it may be possible for the court to clarify the matter in the future if one of the litigants was to bring witnesses supporting his claim. So I think what Rav Nachman is saying is in the real world, somebody will seize it now, whoever's in a stronger position to do that. But we're not precluding a litigated outcome later when new evidence is introduced. And the Gemara asks, and in what way is this case different from that which we learned in a Mishna tractate Bava Mitzia, page 100a, with regard to one who exchanges a cow for a donkey, and the cow had a calf, and similarly, one who sells his Canaanite maidservant, and she gave birth. And this one, the seller says, she gave birth before I sold either the cow or the maidservant, and the offspring belongs to me. And that one, the buyer says, she gave birth after I purchased her, and the offspring belongs to me. Well, the ruling is that they should divide the value of the newborn, since it cannot be established when they know when the baby was born, but they don't know exactly when, and they don't know whether the transaction, the purchase and sale, happened before or after. And since it cannot be known, they're not going to be able to clarify that, then they divide the value. So the Gemara answers there in the case of the exchange for this one, i.e. the buyer, he has financial involvement. Now we're on page 35b. And for that one, i.e. the seller, he has financial involvement. Since each of them has a definite claim to owning the offspring, as each of them owned the cow or the maidservant at one point, it is reasonable for the court to divide the offspring between the two parties. By contrast, here in the case of Rav Nachman, if it belongs to this master, if the land belongs to this guy, it doesn't belong to that guy. And if it belongs to that guy, it doesn't belong to that guy. It's not that both of them had a financial interest in the land. One of them is telling the truth, one of them is lying, but we can't tell who. One of them might not even be lying on purpose. There might be a mistake somewhere, but they don't both have some kind of a claim, and that's why we can't split it between them. Now, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Hold on a second. Google making me reload the document where Nina passes me questions. Okay. The sages of Narodea say in a case where two parties disputed the ownership of a certain property and the court ruled that whoever is stronger prevails, If one from the marketplace who had no claim came and took possession of it, the court does not remove it from his possession. As Rabbi Chia teaches in the Tosefta of Bava, comma 10:14, a robber of the public, meaning a robber whose victim is unknown, is not called a robber. Since it is unclear from whom he robbed, no one is able to demand payment. Here too, since it is unclear whose property it is, neither can demand that it be taken from the robber. And Rav Ashi said in disagreement, actually he is called a robber and the property is taken from him. And what is meant by he is not called a robber? It means that the stolen item is not subject to being returned, and consequently he is unable to fully atone as he does not know whom to repay, right? It's actually not so good for him that he doesn't know who he robbed, because he'll never be able to make an atonement. But do we let this guy that's a known robber stay in possession of the property? No, we do not. And that's where we'll pick it up tomorrow, God willing, Sunday at the regular Sunday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Just seeing one comment from Joe. There are people who are selling the deeds to properties they don't own, and there are companies that provide services to support the victims if they're retained in advance. A famous case of this chicanery happened this past year when they tried to sell Graceland out from under the children of Lisa Marie Presley. Wow, that is a crazy story. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. That's what I've got for us tonight. And again, may our learning tonight accrue to the merit and somehow help along the healing and recovery of those who are injured in this terrible, rocket attack in the north of Israel, and be of some comfort to the bereaved. And may we all remember, and may we be blessed that God answers Moses' prayer, that we, all of us, be not like sheep in every way, that we should not be like sheep. Good vach.